I found an STD test in my wife's bag and realized she was cheating on me. I used to think I was hard to surprise. I am a lawyer. I make a living watching people swear they are telling the truth while their eyes are busy practicing fiction. But nothing in my case files prepared me for the moment I reached into my wife Marina's tote bag and pulled out a folded paper that looked like it had been ironed by anxiety. It was not a love note, not a receipt, not some harmless reminder to buy oat milk. It was a clinic printout. The kind with clean fonts and cold headers. STD screening results. Her name on it. The date from last week, and the part that made my stomach drop was the reason for visit line, exposure concern. I stood in our kitchen holding that paper like it might stain my fingers. The house was quiet except for the fridge humming like it was trying to warn me. And I did what lawyers do when the world tilts. I read every line twice. Then I read it like an opponent wrote it. Then I read it like a judge would. Marina came in, cheerful and distracted, wearing her gym hoodie like a costume of innocence. She looked at me and smiled. Then she saw the paper, and her smile unzipped itself. You know that tiny pause when someone tries to decide whether to lie or confess. It is a blink long, but it tells you everything. I did not shout. I did not throw anything. I did not ask dramatic questions that only exist in movies. I just held the document up and asked, "What is this?" She said it is nothing. Then she said it is a mistake. Then she said she did not know how it got there. And I almost laughed. Because if there is one thing I know, it is that paper does not teleport. I said I am going to get tested. She tried to grab my arm. I stepped back. Not because I was scared of her, but because I needed space to keep my dignity from spilling all over the floor. She followed me down the hall, saying my name the way people say it when they want it to mean come back. I grabbed my keys, and I left. In the car, I kept my hands on the wheel like I was holding my life in place. I drove to the clinic in a haze of calm that felt unnatural, like my brain had filed an emergency motion to delay emotions until further notice. At the clinic, the nurse was kind in that professional way that says she has seen every version of heartbreak. I filled out forms, sat under fluorescent lights, and tried not to imagine what I did not want to know. The test was quick. The waiting was not. While I waited for results, I replayed the last year. Marina staying late at work. Marina suddenly caring about her phone angle. Marina going on girls' weekends that somehow had no photos. I told myself not to build a case on vibes, but the evidence was stacking itself. When the results came back and everything was fine, relief hit me first. Then anger slid right in behind it, like it had been waiting in the lobby. I drove home and did not speed, because I refused to let someone else's choices turn me into a reckless person. I walked in, and Marina was on the couch with red eyes. She looked up like I was the judge and the jury. I set the results on the table. I said I am fine. She exhaled hard, like that was the main issue, and I realized she was more afraid of consequences than she was sorry. I picked up her certificate, the one that started this whole domino line, and I handed it to her. I said I am leaving. She said please do not. She said it is not true. She said you are misunderstanding everything, and I heard the classic defense strategy, deny, minimize, confuse. I stayed calm because calm is power. I said, Marina, I know the power of any document. A document does not need to raise its voice. It just sits there and stays true. She looked at the paper, and then at me. Her lips trembled. Then she tried a new angle. She said someone could have used her information. She said maybe the clinic mixed up files. She said, you know, mistakes happen, and I nodded like I was considering it. Because in court you let people finish their story, so the contradictions can speak for themselves. I said, okay. Then we will call the clinic right now. Speakerphone. Confirm the appointment time. Confirm the signature. Confirm the ID. Her face went pale, and she said, we do not need to do that. And right there, in that one sentence, I learned more than I had learned in 10 years of marriage. I looked around our living room, the framed photos, the throw blanket she insisted matched the curtains, the little life we built with careful hands, and I thought, I did not lose a home today. I lost an illusion, and illusions are expensive to maintain. I picked up my laptop bag from the chair. I did not pack yet, because I was not ready for the sound of drawers opening and closing. But I was ready for the boundary. Marina stood up fast. She said, "You cannot just walk out. We are married." And I smiled, a small, tired smile. Because that line always sounds different when someone has already stepped out first. I said, "Watch me," then my phone buzzed. And when I looked down, I saw a notification from an unknown number. A simple message with no greeting and no mercy. It said, "You should check her other bag, the one she keeps in the trunk." And my heart did that quiet, heavy thing. The thing it does when a new piece of evidence arrives, and you realize the case is bigger than you thought. I looked up at Marina. She was staring at my phone like she could will it to disappear, and I knew the night was not even close to over. I did not say anything about the message at first, because I have learned that silence can be a spotlight. Marina was watching me too closely, like she was trying to read the verdict before I spoke it. I slipped my phone into my pocket and looked at her the way I look at witnesses who suddenly remember they left the oven on. I said, "I need air." She tried to step in front of me, and I sidestepped without touching her. Calm is not kindness. Calm is control. I walked out to the driveway, and the January cold slapped me awake. My breath came out like little storms. My car sat there like a loyal friend. And behind it, Marina's SUV looked innocent, which is hilarious if you think about how often trouble wears the same paint color as normal life. I opened my car first to make it look casual. Then I moved to her trunk. It was locked. Of course it was locked. People who say they have nothing to hide love locks. I did not break anything. I did not do anything dramatic. I used the spare key on the hook inside the garage, the one Marina forgot existed because I am usually the one who remembers where we put things. The trunk clicked open, and the smell of perfume hit me, sweet and expensive. Like a cover story, inside was a small black duffel bag, nothing fancy, no brand, which made it more suspicious. The things people show off are rarely the things they hide. I unzipped it and found a second pouch inside. Medical papers folded tight, a pharmacy bag, and a travel-size bottle of mouthwash, which felt like a strange detail until you remember how people tried to erase traces. I pulled out the papers, and my hands steadied like I was back at work. I scanned dates, clinic names, and there it was again. Testing, follow-up, and a prescription slip with a name that was not hers. It was a man's name, and it was printed like the clinic expected him to pick it up himself. I read it twice because my brain wanted it to be a typo. It was not. I stood there with the trunk open, the cold cutting through my jacket, and I felt that new kind of betrayal. The kind that is not just about cheating. It is about planning, logistics, backups. The kind that says she had a whole second storyline running while I was paying the subscription fee for the first one. I heard the garage door creak, and Marina called my name from the doorway, her voice too bright, too controlled. She said, "What are you doing?" I turned slowly and held up the prescription slip. I did not wave it. I did not fling it. I just held it like a lawyer holds an exhibit. She froze, and her face did something I had never seen before. It was like the mask tried to reset and failed. She said, "That is not mine." I said, "It was in your trunk, in a bag inside a bag." And she said, "Maybe someone put it there." And I almost clapped. Because apparently we lived in a neighborhood where strangers used trunks as community bulletin boards. I said, "Marina, stop. You are stacking excuses like cheap plastic chairs. One wobble and the whole thing collapses." She took a step toward me and lowered her voice. She said, "Please do not do this outside," like the driveway had feelings, like the pavement was going to judge her. I said, "Fine. We will do it inside." And we walked back in like two people returning from a party where the music stopped early. In the living room, she tried a softer approach. She said, "I love you." She said, "We can fix this." She said, "You are overreacting." And that last one hit me like a spark because it was so familiar. Overreacting is what people call it when you react to something they wanted to keep hidden. I said, "Tell me the truth." She said, "What truth?" I said, "The truth that matches these documents." And she shook her head fast. Then she started crying. And the problem with tears is that they can be real and still be tactical. She said it was one time. Then she said it was not even that. Then she said it was a mistake. Then she said she felt lonely, and I watched her cycle through explanations like a radio stuck between stations. None of it landed because the documents did not care about her feelings. The documents just existed. I asked one question that mattered. Who is he? She said there is no he, and I held up the prescription again. I said then, why is there a he on this? She stared at it, like it might bite her. Then she whispered a name. Not loud, like she wanted the sound to stay trapped in the room. She said Evan, and my body went warm, then cold, because I knew that name, not personally, but professionally. Evan Hart, a client from last year. A man who hired my firm to handle a dispute that involved money and reputation. The kind of case where people smile while sharpening knives, except knives are not allowed in my story, so let us say they smile while preparing paperwork. I had met Evan twice. He had a firm handshake and the kind of confidence that comes from always having someone else deal with consequences. Marina had served coffee during one meeting at our house. She had laughed at something he said. I remembered it now like a slow-motion replay. I remembered thinking she was being extra friendly, and I remembered brushing it off because I trusted my wife. Funny how trust is always the first thing we call naive after it breaks. I said Evan Hart. And Marina flinched like the name was a slap. She said, please do not say it. I said I will say it as many times as needed until the lies stop. She begged me to sit. I stayed standing. She said Evan came on to her. She said she felt pressured. She said she did not know how to tell me, and I listened, because I take claims seriously. But something did not fit. The duffel bag did not look like pressure. The repeated tests did not look like a single panic moment. The mouthwash did not look like helplessness. It looked like routine. And then my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number, another message. It said, ask her about the cabin weekend. And I stared at the screen because we did not have a cabin, not officially. Not on any calendar we shared. I looked up and Marina was watching my face again, reading the message through my expression, and before I even asked, she whispered, how do you know about that? And there it was. The confirmation without a question. Like a door opening by itself in a haunted house. Except no ghosts, just choices, I said Marina, who is texting me. She shook her head. Then she said, I do not know. Then she said, maybe it is Evan, and my stomach tightened. Because if Evan was doing this, it was not just cheating. It was leverage. It was control. It was someone playing games with my marriage like it was a file on his desk. I walked to the window and looked out at the street, as if the answer might be parked at the curb. Then I heard Marina behind me. Her voice small, she said, he said you would ruin us. And I turned slowly. I said, say that again? She swallowed. She said, Evan said if I told you, you would ruin him, and he would ruin us first. And I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was clear now. My wife had not just betrayed me. She had been pulled into a mess with someone who thought documents were weapons, which would be adorable if I did not make my living collecting sharper ones. I said, Marina, pack a bag. She said, what? I said, you are leaving tonight. She said, where? I said, somewhere safe and away from him. Because someone is texting me from the shadows and I do not like surprises. She started to protest. Then she stopped. Because my tone was not negotiable, I grabbed my coat, and as I reached for the door, my phone buzzed again. One more message. And this one was short. It said, he is on his way to your house right now. And my hand froze on the doorknob. Because whatever this was, it was no longer just a marriage falling apart. It was a setup unfolding in real time. And I was done being the last person to know what was happening in my own life. When you hear someone is on their way to your house, your brain does a strange inventory. Not of weapons or exits, but of unfinished thoughts. I stood there with my hand on the door and realized how calm I felt. Not peaceful calm, but focused calm. The kind you get right before a trial opening statement. Marina asked who is coming, and I did not answer right away because I was listening to the house. The faint tick of the wall clock, the hum of the heater, everything normal pretending this was a normal night. I said, Evan is coming. She sat down hard like the floor had moved. She said he promised he would not. And I said, people like Evan promise whatever fits the moment. Then they rewrite it later. I told Marina to go upstairs and pack quietly, essentials only, no drama. She asked if I was scared, and I surprised myself by saying no. I am annoyed. Fear makes you small. Annoyance makes you precise. She went upstairs and I stayed in the living room. I checked the locks. Not because I expected anything wild, But because habits matter, I checked my phone again. Unknown number. No new messages, which bothered me more than if there had been one. Silence from someone who just warned you is never comforting. I poured myself a glass of water and took one slow sip like I was teaching my body how to behave. Then headlights washed over the front window. Not dramatic, just a car pulling up like it belonged there. Marina peeked from the stairs, her face pale. I raised a hand to signal stay back. The knock came, firm but polite. The kind of knock that assumes the door will open. I opened it because hiding would have given him power. Evan stood there smiling, coat perfectly tailored, hands visible, posture relaxed, like he was visiting colleagues. Not the wreckage of my marriage, he said, hey, using my name like we were friends. I said you should leave. He chuckled softly and said, can we talk? I said we are talking now. He glanced past me like he expected Marina to appear. I stepped slightly to block the view. Small movements matter, he said. I think there has been a misunderstanding. I said interesting, because misunderstandings usually do not involve anonymous texts and hidden bags. His smile tightened just a bit, the mask adjusting. He said, I do not know what you think you know. And I said, I know documents. I know patterns. And I know when someone shows up uninvited to control a narrative. He laughed, a short sound, and said, you always were dramatic. That one line flipped a switch. Not anger, clarity. He was not here to explain. He was here to intimidate. Politely, professionally. He leaned in slightly and lowered his voice. He said Marina made choices, adults make choices, and I felt a flicker of respect for the attempt. Blame shifting wrapped in logic. I said yes, she did, and so did you, and choices leave trails. He straightened up and said, I think it would be best for everyone if this stayed private, he said. Careers get damaged over misunderstandings, families too. And there it was. The threat without teeth showing. I smiled and said, you are right. Privacy is important, which is why I already forwarded copies of those documents to a secure folder, time-stamped, backed up, and shared with my firm partner. Just in case I get forgetful. His eyes flicked. Not much, but enough. He said that seems excessive. I said you taught me to prepare for worst-case scenarios. He took a step back and said you are making this bigger than it needs to be. And I said no. You did that when you involved my wife, and then tried to manage the fallout like a business problem. Marina appeared at the top of the stairs with a bag. Evan saw her, and his face softened, which made my stomach turn. He said, Marina, tell him. Tell him this is not what it looks like. She did not move. She did not speak, and in that silence something shifted. Evan realized he had lost control of at least one variable. He cleared his throat and said, we can fix this. All of us. I said, there is no we. There is you leaving. He hesitated. Then he smiled again, wider this time, and said, you are bluffing. Lawyers bluff, I said sometimes, but not when documents agree with each other. He stared at me for a long second. Then he said, you think you are winning, but you do not know who you are dealing with? And I laughed. A real laugh. Because that line is always delivered by people who think reputation is armor. I said I know exactly who I am dealing with. Someone who thought he could scare me into silence, and someone who forgot that I do this for a living. He shook his head and stepped back onto the porch. He said, this is not over. And I said it is for tonight. He turned and walked to his car. No shouting, no scene. Just a man recalculating. When his car pulled away, Marina finally spoke. She said, what happens now? I looked at her and felt the weight of everything. The love that had been there. The trust that was gone. The strange gratitude that I found out before my life calcified around a lie. I said, now you go stay with your sister. Tomorrow we talk logistics, not reconciliation, logistics. She nodded, tears falling, and I did not wipe them away. Not because I was cruel, but because some moments are meant to be felt fully. She left an hour later. The house felt bigger and emptier. I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle. My phone buzzed again, unknown number, a final message for the night. It said, good job, but be careful. He does not lose gracefully. I typed back one line and then deleted it, because some messages do not need replies. Instead, I saved the number, labeled it leverage, and leaned back. Because if Evan thought this was the end, he had never really understood how stories like this work. The twist always comes when someone thinks they are in control. And I was just getting started. The next morning felt unreal in that quiet way after a storm passes without asking permission. I woke up alone on my side of the bed and noticed how quickly the mind starts adjusting when the truth finally replaces guessing. I made coffee for one out of habit, and then laughed at myself and poured it out, and made a fresh cup because even small symbols matter. I checked my phone. No messages from Marina. One missed call from my partner at the firm, and a news alert about a pending civil complaint filed overnight against Evan Hart by an unnamed party that got my attention. I called my partner back, and he did not waste time. He said something strange is happening. Someone filed a complaint using fragments of evidence that looked familiar but incomplete, like someone trying to rush a narrative before it could be controlled. I did not need a crystal ball to know who that someone might be. Leverage, the anonymous texter, whoever they were, had moved from warning to action. I told my partner to slow everything down. I said if someone is trying to force the timeline, we let them. But on our terms. After I hung up, Marina finally texted. She said I am safe. I said good. She said I am sorry. I said we will talk later, because sorry without honesty is just noise. An hour later, my phone rang again. Different unknown number, same calm tone through text. It said he is panicking. That means he will make mistakes. I asked one question. Who are you? The reply came slower this time. It said someone he underestimated. I stared at the screen and realized the story had shifted again. This was no longer just about my marriage or even Evan. It was about exposure, power, and timing. I went into my office and started doing what calms me best, organizing facts, dates, documents, not to attack, but to understand the shape of the battlefield. By noon it was clear. Someone was using Evan as a pressure point and my situation as a spark. I was collateral and catalyst at the same time. Marina called in the afternoon, her voice steadier. She said Evan had been controlling more than she admitted. Messages, threats about my career, promises that sounded like safety but felt like cages. I listened and said one thing. We will be honest now or we will not talk at all, she agreed. And for the first time I believed her. That night I sat alone again, but differently, not abandoned, just unburdened. My phone buzzed one last time before midnight. The message read, "Tomorrow it becomes public. Make sure you are ready." I set the phone down and smiled slightly, because readiness is relative. And for the first time since this began, I was not reacting. I was waiting, and that is where real control lives. The morning everything went public. I did not rush to check the news. I showered, dressed, and tied my tie with the same care I used on trial days. Because routine is armor, by the time I arrived at the office, the phones were already busy. Evan Hart's name was everywhere. Complaints, internal reviews, whispers turning into headlines without needing volume. I watched it unfold like a chessboard tipping. Not because I pushed it, but because I refused to stop it. My partner asked if I wanted to step back. I said no, stepping back suggests guilt. Clarity does not hide. Marina called once, then again I answered on the third try. She said he had tried to reach her all night, promises mixed with fear. I told her not to respond. Silence is the only language people like him respect when they lose leverage. The anonymous number texted again. It said, "See how fast power evaporates when light hits it." I finally replied. I said, "Thank you." The response came almost immediately. "You are welcome. This was never about you, but you handled it well." That sentence settled something in me. I was not chosen because I was weak. I was chosen because I was connected. And I refused to be used quietly. By afternoon, Evan's firm issued a statement, carefully worded and hollow. I read it once and closed it. Statements do not matter when documents speak louder. Marina came by the house that evening to pick up more things. We spoke calmly, honestly, without performance. She said she understood if there was no future for us. I said understanding is the first real thing you have given me in months. And for once, she did not argue. When she left, I felt something close to relief. Not joy, but space. My phone buzzed one last time that night. The anonymous contact sent a final message. It said, "You did not flinch. That matters." Then the number went silent. I saved the chat and archived it. Not because I needed it anymore, but because some chapters deserve a record. I sat in the quiet house and thought about power. How it shifts, how it hides, and how easily it collapses when someone refuses to play along. I did not win in a dramatic way. I won by staying myself, by trusting evidence over emotion, and by walking away with my head up, which in the end felt like the only victory that actually lasts. The days that followed were quieter, but heavier in a thoughtful way. Like the air after a long argument finally settles. Evan disappeared from the headlines as fast as he had appeared. Not cleared, just quiet. Which in my world usually means negotiations are happening behind closed doors. Marina and I met one last time at a cafe, neutral ground, daylight, no shadows to hide in. We talked like two adults who finally stopped pretending. She admitted she liked how powerful Evan made her feel at first, then how trapped she felt when the power shifted. I told her attraction is not a crime, but secrecy always is. She nodded, not defensive, just tired. We agreed on separation terms quickly, almost efficiently, which felt strange but right. Efficiency is honesty without drama. When we stood to leave, she said, "You will be fine," and I smiled and said, "I know." Back at work, I turned down 3 invitations to comment publicly, because closure does not require an audience. My partner joked that I had missed my chance to be famous. I said I would rather be free. That night, I packed away the last of Marina's things, and noticed how the house already felt more like mine. Not because she was gone, but because I was no longer shrinking inside it. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, and when I woke up, there were no messages waiting, no warnings, no threats, just a normal morning, and that felt like a gift I had earned. I realized then that the real twist in this story was not betrayal or exposure. It was discovering how calm strength can be when you stop negotiating with lies. I did not need revenge. I needed clarity. And once I had it, everything else fell into place. Not perfectly, but honestly, which is better always. Weeks later, life did what it always does when drama leaves. It filled the space with normal moments that quietly rebuild you. I took up running again in the mornings, not to escape thoughts, but to let them line up and behave. The case involving Evan resolved without my name ever becoming a headline, which felt like justice with good manners. Marina and I finalized everything without court theatrics, 2 signatures and a nod, no bitterness left to perform. One evening, I sat on my porch watching the sun drop behind the houses and thought about how close I came to doubting myself. Not because I lacked intelligence, but because trust can blur vision. I laughed softly at the idea that a folded piece of paper had done what months of suspicion could not. It forced truth into the room. I did not lose a wife. I lost a version of my life that depended on pretending, and that trade turned out to be fair. My phone buzzed once from my partner asking if I was ready for a new case. I texted back always, because moving forward is the most underrated form of strength. As the night settled, I felt steady, not triumphant, just aligned. I knew who I was again. A man who respects facts, honors himself, and walks away when the evidence says it is time. And if there is one thing I learned, it is this: documents do not lie, but neither does intuition when you finally give it permission to speak. I turned off the porch light and went inside, closing the door gently behind me. Not because I was afraid of what was outside, but because I was comfortable with what was within. And that is how this story ends. Not with noise, but with peace earned the hard way.